I was being abused, raped, burned, beat, in any kind of way, and I live in a cage for 14 years. They work with law enforcement from Mexico. They also are clients. They are our client number ones. They're paid top dollar for children's sex.
Violence, threats, manipulation, and even promises of love. All tactics predators use to trap children into sex trafficking. Every year, there are more than 5,000 cases reported. The stories of survival, shocking.
They raped me in a group of 30 men. I would lose conscious back and forth. It's like I was alive, but I was dead.
Florida ranks third in the nation for sex trafficking. The Panhandle of Florida ranks at the top of the list because of the I-10 and I-65 corridor. According to the State Department, 12 to 14 is the average age children enter into prostitution.
To me, that should stun our citizenry. That the average age of entry into something as despicable as prostitution in our country is a middle school student, barely out of elementary school.
Tonight, we're hosting Your Voice, Your Future, Sex Trafficking in Florida. Our distinguished panel, Agent John Canning, the FBI's Child Exploitation Task Force Coordinator for Northwest Florida. Brad Dennis, the co-founder of Call to Rescue and the National Search Director of Class Kids. Pensacola Police Chief Tommy Leiter, who has served our community for 27 years. And from A21 Pensacola, Alicia Tappan. A21 is a nonprofit organization that spreads awareness about human trafficking. Our host tonight, award-winning journalist and Behind the Headlines anchor, Mark Hyman. Let's start the conversation.
Good evening, and I'm Mark Hyman. Thank you at home for joining us for this special Your Voice, Your Future presentation, this roundtable on sex trafficking in Florida. I'd also like to thank the listeners of our radio partner, News Talk 1620. We're glad you're part of tonight's program. I'm joined here this evening by Miss Shauna Newell. She has her own very tragic story. She was once a victim of sex trafficking, and I'd like to think that perhaps today you think of yourself less of a victim and more of a survivor. First of all, may I call you Shauna?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your story. And yours is one of those events that every parent has nightmares about. You were lured by a trusted friend, abducted, and held hostage, savagely beaten, sexually assaulted for several days. It's a nightmare that most people couldn't even imagine.
Right.
Fortunately, you got free, but clearly you have wounds that still run deep that people can't see, and that's the emotional trauma that you still carry with you today. Let's just start off and talk for a moment about one of the most important issues that we all think is critical, trust. You must still have trust issues regarding friendships and romantic interests. Can you just talk about that for a moment?
Absolutely. I don't make new friends. All the friends that I have, I've had for, I'd say, 10 years or more. I don't trust people easily, so I don't make new friends. I'm not easily comfortable in big crowds with a lot of people that I don't know. And as far as romantic relationships, they're a lot harder. It's a lot harder to let someone in when there are things you don't understand about yourself.
Looking back at what happened to you, were there perhaps signs suggesting what might possibly be in store for you that perhaps you overlooked at the time, and now looking back at it, you said, I should have picked up on that. I should have realized that maybe there was trouble ahead of me? Or was it just a situation that was completely unavoidable?
I feel it's a little bit of both. I do think that there were warning signs, mainly because, you know, growing up you always hear that if it's too good to be true, if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. So it was too good to be true. So I think that should have been the first indicator. But also, I was 16. I was naive. I wanted to make new friends. I wanted to do new things and, you know, have trust in the world. So.
And that was one of your first opportunities to have a sleepover with a friend, someone
Right.
you had known for a relatively short period of time, but you'd become close to, and that was part of the recruitment process because they earned your trust.
Right.
violated your trust, and sadly they robbed something from you that you can never get back, and that was your childhood innocence.
Absolutely.
Parents often wrestle with the judgment and the decision making of their teenagers. How much leeway do we give them versus how tightly do we control them? No teenager wants to be driven to, dropped off, and picked up at someone's home like a 5-year-old going on a play date.
Yeah.
As mortifying as it sounds to every teenager in America today, would you tell families to put that aside, to suck it up, let the parents be helicopter parents, and keep a little tighter control on your kids so they know where they are, so if something goes sideways, something goes awry, if there's a mystery out there, at least they have a place to start?
I think that it starts in your home. You should build trust with your children and just tell them the dangers of everything that could happen. And, you know, I do think that you should meet all of their friends. I am the mom who drops them off and picks them up and walks them inside and walks them back to the car, you know. So I think that if you establish trust with your children, then it's a lot easier to explain to them things and for them to believe you.
And that trust is a two-way street.
Right.
Parents going down to the children and children having trust back to the parents. How do you engender that trust?
Just being open. That's always been my policy. Being open, like, no, you know, the talks are not always easy and there are a lot of questions, but I would rather them know from me that, you know, the world is not what it seems and you can't always trust anyone really, you know, so you just have to be open with them and help them feel comfortable enough to come to you and share things with you. And that doesn't go just for your home, you know, because kids talk about their friends as well. So if you establish that trust with your children, it doesn't just stay in your home, because then that child will talk to the next child and the next child will talk to the next child. And it's like, it's a whirlwind with the kids, you know. It starts with the younger generation. They're the ones that talk.
Well, let's forget a moment about the adults watching tonight's program. Let's talk about just the preteens and the teens who are watching us this evening. What advice would you offer to them so they could better prepare themselves to either look for the signs or ask the right questions so they won't find themselves in a similar situation as you did?
My best advice to the younger crowd are definitely stay informed about what's going on in your community, and trust your parents mainly. That's the one thing that I harp on the most now, is trust your parents. Because at 16, I didn't know better, you know. So thinking back with my 16-year-old mind, had I listened to my dad and the way he explained, you know, just men who would do nice things for you to draw you in, you know, to make you feel like they would take care of you and like they're gonna love you and they're gonna be there for you. And then next thing you know, you find yourself in my situation, you know, because it's not always what it seems.
And it's easier said than done, because I've
Correct.
had teenagers
Yes.
and teenage daughters, and the last person they want to listen to is their dad.
Yeah, absolutely. And they barely listen to me. So it's, you know, it's one of those things you just have to build that trust first. That's the main thing with kids, is trust.
Well, thank you for joining us this evening and for sharing your story. Your voice is so very important. And we have more on Shauna's story. Let's check in with Jamarlo Phillips.
28-year-old Shauna Newell says she is a victim of sex trafficking.
I was 16. Right, I was 16 years old, so I was the most naive at that age.
Newell says her worst nightmare began after a friend invited her over for a slumber party 11 years ago.
Her dad kept taking us shopping and, you know, was buying us anything we wanted. He bought us alcohol at one point, so he was really cool. Like, I was young, so I wasn't allowed to drink.
The now 28-year-old victim says she was drugged, raped, and beaten over the course of 4 days before she was found. Now, she wants to increase awareness and bring more of these cases to light.
I guess I learned that things aren't always what they seem, you know, and that you really should. And I say this all the time, and now that I'm a parent, I kind of like chuckle to myself. I always say now that you should definitely listen to your parents. You know, they see things that you don't necessarily see. They can see through people.
Investigator Brad Dennis remembers victims like Newell.
I have sat with victims, I have buried victims, I have preached victims' funerals.
He worked his first sex trafficking case 12 years ago.
The problem that we have today is that we are not putting enough focus and emphasis on the demand side of this industry. And until we choose to go after these men that are exploiting these women and children, whether it's through labor or through sex, then this is going to continue to grow, and it's going to continue to grow out of hand.
It's why victims like Newell are voicing their concern.
I mean, my hope is one day that I won't need to tell my story anymore. Because, I mean, it's painful, you know, to talk about it and to bring it up over and over and over again, and, you know, the naysayers and all that kind of stuff. So I hope one day that all of the women who have come forward will no longer need to do that, that it will just be a known thing, you know, and that we could hopefully get a handle on it.
Jamarlo Phillips, Channel 3 News.
We've got so much to talk about. I have a lot of questions I want to put to our panel of experts, but you at home can also join us in this important discussion. News anchor Sue Strawn is in the Cyber Center monitoring social media. She'll explain how you can be part of the discussion. Sue?
All right, thank you very much, Mark. And of course, one of the most important aspects of the program tonight is your voice. We want to hear from you, and there are many ways that you can reach out to us. Send us your questions, send us your comments on this very important topic that we are tackling tonight. You can tweet us at WEARTV. Use the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture on Facebook and any tweets that you send. Send video with your questions. You can do that to See It, Shoot It, Send It via our mobile app. And you can text us. Text a video with your questions or comments to 95577. Again, that's 95577. And again, probably one of the most important aspects of this program is hearing your voice and you engaging with us. We look forward to that throughout the evening. Mark?
Thanks, Sue. And Sue's absolutely right, because a question we ask live on air may be yours. So please be a part of tonight's discussion. Let's kind of start off broad this entire topic, because you four are experts on this, but a lot of our viewers don't know the details, the definitions. And Ms. Tappan, or Mrs. Tappan, I want to start off with you, because people often get confused between human trafficking and human smuggling. Can you just explain to our viewers what human trafficking is and why it's not human smuggling?
Sure. So human trafficking, there's 5 different paradigms, number one, of it. It's not just sex trafficking, it's child soldiers, it's debt bondage, it's involuntary domestic servitude. And those words kind of sound ambiguous, but literally, when you think of smuggling, you think of abduction. You think of somebody being stolen and then taken across the border. Well, there's a whole recruitment and luring process that happens to these victims where they don't even know that it's happening to them, whether through fraud or just different types of coercion. But every single type of human trafficking is forced.
And Special Agent Canning, anyone who's watched the movies, Taken, Slumdog Millionaire, they're going to walk away with the impression this only happens to poor foreigners in other countries. It's Albanian mobsters. It's Indian hustlers. Yet this is a very real problem, not just in the United States, but right here in Florida.
Absolutely. It's most of our victims that we have with these cases are actually United States citizens from this country, and they're not of the lower social economic status, but usually of the middle class to upper middle class status.
Mr. Dennis, let's talk about the recruitment process that Mrs. Tappan had talked about, because again, probably every parent in America has had a nightmare at least once of their child being abducted. And we started the program off with the Shauna Newell story, and she was abducted. Kind of a recruitment in the process, in the early process, but abducted. But that's really the minority of these events. It's what Mrs. Tappan mentioned. There's the recruiting process that goes on where they bring these oftentimes young boys, young girls into the sex trafficking realm.
Yeah, I mean, it's an entire process of grooming as well as the recruitment process itself. Just think of it this way, you know, we suffer right now in the United States as 2,200 children are reported missing every single day in the United States, and a vast majority of those are runaways. And when you consider those runaways, here's what you need to consider. A child runs away for one of 2 reasons. They're running from something or they're running to something. In other words, they have needs, and these recruiters and these groomers understand that. And so what they're going to do is they're going to look at that child, they're going to follow them on social media. They're going to learn as much as they can about this child. And what they're really looking for is what does this child need the most? Do they need attention? Do they need affection? Do they need love? Are they looking for something more material? And whatever that is, that's what we want to provide.
And let's follow up on that issue, because being a parent can really be difficult. It can be challenging. And for those of us who had teenage children, it's really challenging at times. For a 2-parent family, where maybe there's a stay-at-home parent, it can be a problem. But then you run into those issues with single parents who work, latchkey kids. Can you discuss how that home environment sometimes is that first process, that first step that perhaps sends these kids spiraling in the wrong direction?
Yeah, I mean, we have a total breakdown in today's society within the family structure itself. I mean, we have a growing number of children that are being raised basically on their own or being raised by single parents. We have a complete absentee father issue in America, deadbeat dads, what have you. But really, the thrust of it is that today's child, today's teenager and tween, their entire social status is based upon whatever they are putting out there online. All of their social status, like when we grew up, it was all about being a part of one crew or another crew. But for these kids, it's how much likes I'm getting, how much pokes I'm getting, how many friends I have. And it's all about the content that they are constantly throwing out there.
Chief, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. And for those of us who think back to years ago, our vision of law enforcement was cops and robbers, finding the bad guy, the bank robber. But you're often, in some respects, kind of babysitters today. Oftentimes we hear law enforcement say some of the most challenging calls they go on are domestic related, whether it's a couple fighting or issues with the children. That's got to be tough on a young officer, a young man, a young woman who may not have enough of the training to go into those situations, try to figure out how serious is this? What steps do we take? Can you just talk about those challenges?
Yeah, you know, I think most of the kids, he was right on. They grow up with social media. They interact with their friends on social media. They interact with their family on social media, and they lack that face-to-face contact. And then you take them, put them in a uniform, send them on a family disturbance where emotions are elevated, and they have to have a conversation with somebody one-on-one. And that is a struggle, I think, across all industries. Law enforcement, we feel it in particular. They do bring a lot to the table, our rookie police officers, in that they embrace and they understand social media and they understand the computers, so that they really excel at that. And they bring that to the table, but I do think they struggle with that face-to-face contact.
And when it comes to cyber crimes, Special Agent Canning, that's such a big responsibility of the FBI today because it encompasses so many things, whether it's the Nigerian oil minister scams, but then we get into the recruitment of young adults, teenagers, preteens on the internet. Can you talk about the challenges we face?
Sure. We have a unit up at headquarters that actually handles specifically the recruitment of minors into this trafficking, whereas our unit in headquarters that handles the adult human trafficking would be covered under civil rights. So under what we call our Violent Crimes Against Children unit, we have a host of investigations that we employ that embrace the cyber aspect of it and the social media aspect of it. And it's a constant challenge for law enforcement to keep up with the developing apps and what the kids are using to engage in conversation. So whether it's online through Omegle or through what we dub as IG Instagram, I know those are old, but there's a host of new apps that are constantly being deployed that we don't know as adults because we just don't have time.
Chief.
Yeah, I think if your child has unrestricted access to the internet, to social media, then our child predators have unrestricted access to your kids. And I think that's something that the parents have to wrap their mind around. Ms. Sewell had mentioned it was something as simple as the offer to buy alcohol. And for us, that seems kind of benign, but for a 15, 16-year-old that doesn't have access to it, if that's what they're going to use as a trigger to get that child to meet them somewhere, that's what they're going to do. And everything is on social media. They talk to me, you know, I'm having an argument with my parents, or I miss my dad, or I wish I could do this. That's something that the predators are going to pick up on. So I think that it's important for parents to get a handle on that social media.
And Mrs. Tappan, so much has changed in the last 15 years with smartphones and the availability, and kids have laptops. 15, 20 years ago, a family was lucky if they had one computer. And I remember there was actually a U.S. Senator I once heard who I thought had the best solution to keep an eye on their children. He said, if you have one computer in the entire family, put it in the kitchen. They'll never get into trouble because mom's looking over their shoulder. But the genie's out of the bottle. Right. Kids have smartphones, they have laptops, they have all sorts of ways to communicate. And I know with my own children, who I have children in college and high school, They are continually amazed at the new apps that are out there, so it's amazing how anyone in law enforcement could even keep up with it. What would be a recommendation on how parents can keep a better control of what their children are looking at?
So I think that if we helicopter our children, then there's a lack of trust that Shauna was already talking about, because you're not giving them the sense of freedom. However, it's really important, obviously, to have a sense of control over those. But we're giving a 10-year-old a smartphone, not a flip phone to call mom and dad, hey, pick me up from soccer practice. We're giving them that access. So if the parents are going to already, distribute this plethora of, unlimited anonymity in the internet world, then they should obviously set some restrictions. I think, times are important. I also would go back to some of those rescue flip phones, and like a 10-year-old does not need all of that stuff. It's too much, there's too much going on. But the other thing I've read recently, which was really great, was tricky people. It's kind of a coined term, but it's something where if an adult is contacting a child, like let's just say a 30-year-old contacting a 15-year-old, that is a tricky person, because a 30-year-old wouldn't normally communicate with a 15-year-old, nor would an adult ask a child for help. So teaching your children, to not necessarily befriend some of these people, even if it is your uncle's best friend, that is a warning sign to me. So teaching the kids who to identify as maybe not necessarily a trusted adult, and not befriend them, and there's no way a relationship status is going to happen, but teaching them that love is something that we show from parents to kids, and kids to kids, but it's not adult to kid strangers, I think that's most important.
Mr. Dennis, a couple of years ago, the Urban Institute had a study in which it reported the underground commercial sex economy, the entire sex industry, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It looked at 8 cities. The 2 of which were closest to the Panhandle area are Atlanta and Miami. And it pegged Atlanta's sex industry as a $200 million criminal enterprise on an annual basis. Miami is $235 million. 2 cities, $500 million. With so much money at stake, how can we possibly crack this?
Well, I can tell you I've worked in both of those cities, and that study is absolutely correct, because in both of those cities, unfortunately, there is areas there that you can literally drive down the road and be propositioned by minors. It's just that prevalent. But to me, the only way that we're ever going to be able to put a handle on this is that we have to attack the demand. The demand, without the demand, you no longer need the supply. And so we need to understand the demand side of this. We need to understand the predator mindset behind this. We need to provide, more opportunities for law enforcement to go after those that are in the demand side of this. Our law enforcement here does a tremendous job. But across the country, there's more officers that are needed, more funding that is needed, the more education that is needed to be able to truly go after this demand.
It's interesting you mentioned education, and Chief, I want to follow up on the education aspect for a moment, because when it comes to the sex industry, there are a number of people who believe it's a victimless crime. I have a willing participant, I'm willing to pay some money, who's harmed? We don't seem to have educated enough of the public that that young boy or young girl, whoever it may may not be there of their own free will. That's not a victimless crime. They are victims by the fact that they're doing this. How can we do a better job of educating the public that there are real lives at stake?
I think this is part of it, and big part of it. We talk about it's oftentimes in drug dealing. In your neighborhood, if there's a drug dealer in your neighborhood. If you see something, say something. But I think it's the same thing with the sex trade. A lot of that stuff it's moved off of the street. There's rarely do we see prostitutes on our public streets. Most of it's moved online. Most of it's behind closed doors or in hotel rooms. If you see something, say something. I think that's the message that we need to get out. We'll follow up on a case, we'll kick in a door, we'll serve a search warrant, we'll make an arrest and follow up with the interviews. And almost every case we'll talk to somebody that says, I just, something wasn't right. I recognized this, or all these key points, but they just didn't call. They didn't think enough about it to call. And that's one message we need to get out, is to, if you see something, make sure that you say something.
And let's stay with our area here, the Panhandle, a huge tourist destination. And there seems to be something with tourists, mostly men, who leave town, go to a tourist destination, and they think this is the time to party. How can we keep an eye on those who bring some of the bad activity in here?
Yeah, we do our operations to kind of to catch a predator, and it's scary. Less than a week, we did it just a couple of days, and we caught over 25 people that were coming to Pensacola, outside of Pensacola area, coming to Pensacola to have sex with kids. And it was very explicit on what their intentions were. I think Mort, he had mentioned it. The problem is it's labor intensive and it's very expensive. And it's not something that we can do on a continuous basis, but we need to do it enough that they recognize Pensacola. As much as I like to solve the state of Florida's problems or the United States problems, I'll leave that to my colleague here with the FBI. My focus is the city of Pensacola, and we do as much as we possibly can to educate our public here in Pensacola and to hopefully get the message out that this is, don't come here because you're going to get arrested.
And before I bring the special agent back into the conversation, I want to follow up with one more thing. Neighbors are really good about calling law enforcement when they think they see a prowler at the neighbor's home. They see someone at the car down the street. They see someone behind an office building perhaps shouldn't be there at the wrong time of day. But we're reluctant to call when we think it involves domestic issues or sex.
All the time.
Can we change that paradigm?
I hope so. And you know, I wish I could tell you there's a solution. I keep likening it to the drug trade. We'll always have a drug problem, unfortunately. There'll always be police officers. There'll always be class kids. And it's unfortunate. I wish we could work our way out of business. Ms. Sewell had mentioned that she wishes there's a time when she could quit telling her story. It's unfortunate. I think it's a battle we will always fight. Law enforcement isn't the solution to it. It's a community solution. We have to have parents, we have to have neighbors, we have to have buy-in from the community working with us if we're going to make any headway into it.
Special Agent Canning, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they estimate that 1 out of 6 runaways are likely victims of child sexual predators, child sex trafficking. And of that, 86% usually come from foster homes or social services. Not to say the people who come from a strong nuclear family can't be a victim, but since the majority of those come from those third-party groups, foster homes and social services, what does that tell us?
It tells us that our children are, due to the connectivity of the internet and social media, that they are much more able to reach out to strangers these days. And you have a huge group of people who are willing to take advantage of that. We have successfully prosecuted a case here recently in this district where a runaway from Chicago was rescued, right, from a guy, and she ended up getting involved in a gang and was brought down here and made to perform commercial sex in a hotel all weekend long during our tourist season. She was a runaway that, had it not been for social media, would have never been able to make this connection to these people. But because of social media and because we allow them unfettered access, much like to the internet on their cell phones, we have a connectivity that prior to us that are of our age and even some younger, we didn't have 10 years ago. And so while you could almost say that these victims are double vulnerable, right? They're vulnerable because of their state and foster homes. But now, because of their access to all this, they're even more vulnerable to strangers taking advantage of their situation.
Mr. Dennis, the internet is such a wonderful thing. There's so many valuable tools available through the internet, so much you can do for us. This is certainly a recurring theme. We keep talking about how it's a problem. Sure. I want to address one issue with you, and then I want to check in with Sue to find out what our viewers at home think about all this. But let's just explore this just a little further. The whole cyber realm, the internet, social media, apps, all members of the panel have discussed it. Are there any steps that we haven't taken that perhaps we should look at how we perhaps take a little stronger control of it? I would think in my family, my wife is a member of every social media platform. My kids are, that's the rule, is she has to be a member before you can join. And my kids have been good about that. And she keeps an eye on what happens just to make certain she's not worried about them. She's worried about them.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that it has already been mentioned here before, but it's all about parent engagement. And we have to understand what we are authorizing our children to have access to. And we have to have those open communications. You know, it's you're friending someone, but do you really know this person? And if you don't know this person, then you cannot consider this person your friend. And so therefore you must constantly think about the content that you are putting out there. Our children live based upon the content that they are constantly pushing out there for the public to see. And unfortunately, we don't have to necessarily worry about the creepy white van trolling our neighborhoods anymore. We have to worry about the individuals that are crawling through the social media apps, whether it's Omegle, WhatsApp, or Kik. That's where our predators are preying upon our kids today.
We've been talking about the evils that originate through the internet, but there's also some good out there. Sue Strawn has been managing social media at our cyber center. She'll have some of the comments and questions from our viewers at home. Sue, what do you have for us?
Well, we have one comment that is coming from Dina Hill, and she says Uber and Lyft drivers need to be vigilant and aware of who they're picking up and dropping off. If a situation seems strange, bizarre, creepy, report it. And I think this probably begs the question mark for all of us. How do we know that a person is in trouble? How do we know that someone is a victim, and what do we do?
It's such a great question. And the Chief, I want to go back to, because sadly, we live in a litigious society. When I grew up, it was the old lady at the end of the neighborhood who called everyone's parent if anyone in the community did anything wrong. We were always in trouble before we even got home. And now, if that woman or man or whoever it is makes that phone call to your parents' house, they sometimes get yelled at. And they're threatened. I'm going to sue you. How do we get people engaged without running afoul of unruly neighbors?
Yeah, you know, it's like that. It'll always be like that. I think you got to just work past it. I'll say it again. If you see something, say something. That's a great tip. Or Uber and Lyft drivers, taxi cab drivers are a great source of information for us already. I wouldn't concern yourself too much. If you call the police because you see something suspicious, I don't think there's any lawsuit that can attach itself to that. And we're not necessarily going to kick a door in or overreact. We'll get the information, get the address, and we can learn a lot. Just a simple follow-up on that. And we will probably send somebody out and knock on a door, especially if they say, hey, I dropped a child off at this address and it's late at night and they seem scared or there was a little bit more to it. We'll follow up on it. We'll follow up on every single one of them. So.
Please.
So I think for the viewers out there, just to notice if a child has an older adult, whether it's male or female, with them, and they're speaking for them, they're coaching them, it almost sounds rehearsed as far as the child when they actually speak. That's kind of a big sign for human trafficking, just knowing that the kids are not, they're not speaking on their own free will. They're speaking, like I said, if they've been coached or a person is speaking for them.
And can you explore that more, the whole issue of abnormal behavior? Because we have expectations of how certain preteens and teens might behave in public, but can you go a little more into detail about those behaviors that might be signs that, again, you talk about the coaching, what are some other signs that people should look for?
So as far as human trafficking goes, specifically, with girls in hotel rooms. One thing you can look for when people are checking in at their hotel is if there's usually an older gentleman and these girls are kind of dressed up, maybe a little bit like prom or something, but again, they're not speaking and they're letting somebody speak for them. Another way, like at a nail salon specifically, you can see labor trafficking. If your nail technician, whether she speaks English or not, doesn't answer right away to a general question like, how are you? And then all of a sudden a man comes out of the back and says, you know, is there a problem here? That's one that you kind of want to look for as well. Same things happen in a restaurant. You know, the waitress brings you your food and you say, hey, can you bring me something, or this wasn't right. And then you think like a general manager who comes out and say, hey, I just want to make sure everything's going okay. That's one thing, but it's if there's a problem here. You notice that word, you know, is there a problem here? Because they are looking for their best interest to keep their workers out of the limelight or to let you kind of notice that there's something wrong. So the other thing I kind of have learned over the research and working with Brad Dennis, just he can address the teenagers who have been recruited and groomed. Like I said, it sounds like it's almost rehearsed. They know exactly what they're going for, and their pimp or their person will come out and make sure that everything's okay, and they won't even let that child speak on their own free will. Whereas like a normal teenager, their voice, you know, wants to be heard.
And Chief, I want to follow up on something that Mrs. Tappan mentioned. And without a doubt, there are legitimate businesses out there, law-abiding, that do all the right things. But oftentimes, strip clubs, massage parlors, nail salons, may be more likely than other establishments to be a place where there's, whether it's labor, trafficking, or sex trafficking is taking place.
Yes, the question, you know, the strip clubs, you have to have a, in the city anyways, you have to have a permit to work there. And we do follow up on that and check it. So I'm not that concerned necessarily about the strip clubs. Most of them, they have to come in independently, apply for a permit through the police department. But oftentimes the restaurants, the service industry, the heavy service industries. And it's a simple conversation. If you're suspicious enough and you engage them in conversation and they're not, again, they're not responding or they look scared, it just, are you okay? You know, just a simple engage them in conversation is oftentimes sufficient enough. Or if it's not and you're that suspicious of it, again, give us a call.
Mr. Dennis, I'm going to ask a question that, let's say it's a man much like me, sitting at home, watching this for the first time, have no exposure to it. He could be saying, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Why don't they just walk away? Explain why that's so difficult.
Well, it's a very difficult process of the whole walk away thing. I liken it to this. I call what predators do to these children as an extreme form of manipulation. It is operant conditioning at its finest. Operant conditioning is all about positive rewards and negative reward systems. And so the positive reward is going to be, again, going back to what was that need that that child had. Was that need drugs? Is that something that we ended up giving that child to begin to control that child? Was that need love and attention and affection? Whatever that is, I'm going to begin to give that to that child over a period of time, and then I'm going to slowly start taking that away and force that child to continue to do more and more to be able to get that same reward over time. After a while, that child doesn't really understand what has happened. Operant conditioning is about shaping a behavior, and ultimately what I'm trying to do is shape the behavior that I want from this child. And these guys are master manipulators at it.
Before the program earlier today, someone had likened this issue, and this is for our older viewers at home, to an event that happened 40 years ago that was very much in the news. Patty Hearst, kidnapped, eventually became a member of the Symbionese Liberation Army, and that kind of brainwashing took place where perhaps she could have easily walked away, physically could have walked away, but didn't have the emotional or the mental aspect to make that change.
You know, it's the Stockholm Syndrome, and that was Patty Hearst. But again, part of what these guys are going to end up doing is create this family structure. They call all of the girls that the individual has under his control, they're stable. Each one of them are referred to as wife-in-laws or wifeys. They're all building this family structure where this individual is either the matriarch or the patriarch of this family. They set the tone for it, they set the rules for it. And then eventually show that each one of the wifeys have to do their part to basically support the family. So really what the child doesn't understand is I'm doing something illegal. What the child believes is I'm providing for my family. And because I provide for my family, I make the matriarch or the patriarch very happy. We get to go travel as a family. Everything is fine as a family. If these good folks over here go and grab me during a sting operation or whatever, my whole concept is I want to go back to my family. It is not about I'm a victim now. It is about I want to hurry up and get back to my family. And that's a hard process for these guys, as well as those that are in the rehabilitation system, to be able to break those trauma bonds that exist.
Special Agent Canning, we've already addressed the issue of abductions and recruitment, perhaps using the internet. But let's talk about those runaways who've successfully left home, maybe gone a long distance, and they've ended up at the mall, at the bus station. All those locations, the convenience store, those locations where they're trying to earn a few dollars to kind of make ends meet, if you will. There are predators who go to all those locations, specifically looking for those runaways to recruit them there.
That's absolutely correct. And to use the term successful is a relative term, right? Anytime that a child is out there at a bus station or at a mall and they become a victim of one of these predators who has the end goal typically of sexually exploiting them. That's the end goal, and that always is the end goal. And whether it be for their own personal use or for the commercial sex trade, right? So it may not just be for him, but for his business, if you will, and to put them out on the market, and usually not in the area for which they are taken from.
And let's stay with that for a moment, because perhaps a viewer at home may think, okay, that predator, that pimp is going to have this young girl in his stable of prostitutes. What about actually selling them? Are they treated like a commodity and they sell them back and forth to different areas?
Yes, and it depends on the structure of the organization that's doing it. But in the cases that we've seen, there's a variety of ways that they manage the business, if you will. Some girls are given quotas, and it's usually a money quota, or it's usually a person quota. Usually it's a money quota, and they have to make so much money per night. And if they don't, then it's not the pimp that does the beating, it's somebody else, right? And they get disciplined for that. And then they have other people, usually the head madam, are controlling her, and they control the younger girls. And the girls have to meet these litmus tests as they go along to make the business happen.
And I want to stay with that for one more point. Because these girls have a quota, it's our understanding here at 3 News that sometimes they actually move around from city to city, so they're often seen as the new girl, and they spend a period of time in a city, and then they move on to the next city because they're now the new girl there.
That's absolutely correct, and it's not oftentimes, always, right? And they'll target events, whether it be Blue Angel Weekend here, or it's a game over at FSU, or it's a concert down on Orange Beach, and they typically target those areas because it's a large population of people that are influxing to it, and there's a huge market for that. And they're always traveling with the girls, which gives the girls a sense of isolation. So some of these girls travel great distances to come here based on a lure that they have over the internet. And while we can talk about grooming, some of the grooming is just as simple as you're coming here for X, and when you get here away from home 1,500 miles, you're actually here for Y, right? And they take your documents from you, your driver's license, and maybe if you have a social security card. And so you're not going to see a girl that's bound and drug around. It could be something as a psychological coercion to say, well, I can't leave because I have no ID, I have no money, I have nothing. So what do? I have to do what I'm told. And they are bound to their handler or their pimp by those means.
Mrs. Tappan, no one at this table is a clinical psychologist, but if we played that role for a moment, is there more we could do to perhaps build some self-esteem in young adults, particularly young girls, so that they can kind of guard themselves against this activity happening?
So of course, I'm actually an international psychologist, but on the master's level. But what I found, obviously, women who are coming from third world countries, or even most of the countries in the West, are collective societies. So they have, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and other family members living with them. So it obviously is going to start at home. Here in America, we're an independent society. We're very much individualists. So we kind of like to be self-thinkers. And so obviously it's going to start at home to start teaching our kids, self-esteem, you are worth it, right? We live in Pensacola, where the Bible Belt is alive and running, so finding a good, youth group at home or going to church is always great, but not necessarily the answer. When you become, right, like a young woman and you're looking for love, you look for whatever your father gave you. And Brad already mentioned, that we have a problem with the absentee father. But, there's plenty of families here that are full families. And so teaching whatever your kind of dad love you got received, or maybe it's a heavenly father that you received that love from. And I know that's kind of metaphorical, but I believe that's where it starts. And then, like myself, I'm from Michigan, and I moved down to Florida all by myself because, again, we're in an independent society, and I wanted to become an independent. I didn't know anyone, right? So I became friends with whoever showed me love. And looking for the right kind of love that you were introduced as a child is what's most important. Now, let's just say trauma happens, this coercion, you've been a part of the human trafficking system, whether that is international bound or local, and you survive, you get rescued. Now what do? We say they want to go back to their family. Well, I don't believe that they understand what self-worth and self-love is anymore. So finding a good mentor who can guide you through all of that It's number one. Obviously, clinical help is perfect for the individual who is responding to that. But a lot of these women don't respond to clinical help. They want that love that they already received. So teaching them how to get out of the cycle is showing them that there is love in all different ways that is not going to be coerced or abused, and getting them into a group setting that shows them this is the kind of love you need to find. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. I said we had the one case that comes to mind in the city was a massage parlor, and of course it was a front for a prostitution ring, and we made the arrest on it, went in and arrested the owner of the massage parlor and of course the victims, the girls that were prostituting themselves. And the idea was to build the case on the actual owners of it. They were all traced back. They came in from New Orleans, one of those fly-by-night things. They were here for a couple of weeks. Made the arrest, and to get the victims, the females, to say anything, to cooperate in any way with the investigation was nearly impossible. The suspects bonded out, they left, we actually tracked them back, they came in from China, and all of the victims, all the females just disappeared. It was, for law enforcement, it was a nearly impossible task to get them just to have say anything, to convince them that, one, that they were safe, that it's over, and there's a means here for you to be rescued. They just didn't want to be rescued. And the case just fell apart, and that's what we're facing in law enforcement.
We've covered a lot of ground so far, and apparently we've really struck a chord with our viewers. The producers tell me that social media is starting to light up right now. Let's go to the Cyber Center and see what Sue has for us.
Well, Mark, our social media team was out and about today, and in fact, they ran into a mother, and I think she brings somewhat of a different, if you would, an interesting perspective and concern about this particular topic. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
As a mom, I see that, we focus on girls because it seems like that's the face of people who are sex trafficked, but there is not any focus ever on boys. I'm the mother of 2 sons, and that concerns me as well, because I think that everyone in specific age range is vulnerable.
Would a class or something in something like this for the parents and the children be very expensive to bring in somebody that could actually help with this? Is it something that's going to be cost effective, and who's going to pay for it? Is the county going to pay for it?
All right, Mark, and in particular the mother, and as I have been listening to the conversation, there is a lot of focus on young girls, and I'm assuming that this is probably because they are more prevalent and represented in this group. But what about this mother who has concerns about her son?
Mr. Dennis.
Well, I mean, that is a very real concern, and the mother is absolutely correct. I mean, most of the times when we are having this discussion, it is based upon the female victim, but unfortunately, it is also the male victim. Matter of fact, the most commercialized victim when it comes to males are age 6 to 9, and those, unfortunately, that's a very brutal victimization of those children. After that, you're looking at the 13 to 15-year-old that is also commercially exploited. They're just exploited in different venues, in different ways, and therefore it makes it even more difficult for law enforcement to really kind of approach it. It's more of a closed society of predators that prey upon them. There are places online that they're advertised. There's websites in which this actually does take place, but again, most of the victimization is very, very closed, unlike that of the female.
And Mr. Dennis, it's worth pointing out, we're focusing on sex trafficking, and as horrific as that is, and even one victim is one victim too many, the numbers are dwarfed by labor trafficking, which at the beginning of the program, Mrs. Tappan mentioned a lot of that happens abroad, but we do have labor trafficking in this country as well. And that's often a lot of the younger men, younger boys, they're the ones that are more often used because depending on the country and the location, but domestic servants here in this country are sometimes trafficked in. Special Agent Canning, when it comes to pornography, is there any relationship, have we seen any ties between pornography and sex trafficking, or is it specifically child pornography and sex trafficking? Anything that the Bureau has seen?
Yes. So that question is very open. So let's talk about pornography in and of itself and what it does. We know that it lowers the value of the woman. right? It subjectifies the woman and it allows the man to look at the woman as a means to an end. I'm going to use this woman for what I want. So we know that. We know in interviewing hundreds of people who were involved in downloading child pornography that they didn't start with child pornography. Nobody says, hey, I just got on the internet one day and I just started looking at child pornography. No, it starts with adult pornography. And because of the internet, the exposure rate and the vast amount of time that people spend on the internet looking at pornography, it increases what I would call the downward spiral to go from what we would normally dub in our culture adult pornography, legal pornography, down to teens and then child pornography, right? And that exposure to the pornography transcends to the hands-on victims that we see, or the hands-on perpetrators that we see victimizing the children. Because after a while, just looking at the pornography doesn't do it for the child, for the subject. He has to then engage the children.
And let's stay with that topic at the predator for a moment. For anyone who watches the movies, or let's be honest, watches television, when they portray the sexual predator, it's the heavy, overweight, sweaty guy who's 35 to 40, lives by himself, never been married. Is that stereotype realistic? Or are they people that look like me?
They run now all gamuts of society. Well, that stereotype, in a way, still holds somewhat true. However, it's a small sector of what we see. We see all the way down from 19-year-olds up to 70-year-olds, and they run the whole gamut of what this perpetrator supposedly looks like, to the point that you cannot now say, this is the model for which we are looking for that are targeting these boys, right? We're working a case right now internationally where it was a young 20-year-old targeting young adolescent males, trying to get them to perform sex acts online through video. And now we're having to do the duty or the task of identifying all these victims across the entire world because of, and I know it's redundant, but because of our interconnectivity with the internet, our victims spanned way beyond Florida, way beyond the United States now.
All four of the panelists here have been remarkable in the wonderful service you've done, whether it's rescuing, whether it's educating, whether it's a law enforcement side. Are there any elements of this whole issue of coming across someone who's potentially a victim that we haven't addressed? Any other signs, perhaps, Mr. Dennis, that we should be aware of? You've rescued hundreds, been part of a rescue of hundreds of young victims. Are there other indicators that perhaps ought to raise suspicion if someone sees an activity or behavior and says, that just doesn't seem right?
Well, I don't know about the indicators, because I think we've discussed many of the indicators. Really, it just comes down to awareness and being willing to be that voice. Your tagline here is your voice, your future. Until we're willing to actually speak up, our children don't have a future. That's where the predation of our kids is going in America today. All of the statistics continue to grow. And quite frankly, a little bit of my own platform here, but dealing with so many of these children, until we decide to approach the demand side of this, we're never going to fix this. We're never going to stem the tide. And part of that demand side is using your voice. Every single man that is listening to this today, we are part of the problem. All of the men of society is part of the problem. We would not have this issue, whether it's boys that are victims or girls that are victims. The perpetrators of this crime are men. And we as men, we need to be open enough about it to discuss it, to talk about it to other men. And that's where we begin to start to change this, I believe. And
you say men. Is there any portion of this that women are involved as the predator? Are the numbers relatively very small? There are occasions where sometimes families actually
very small as far as the actual predators, not so small as part of the actual traffickers. Matter of fact, women pimps, if you will, is a growing trend in America today. The family side of this is a huge issue. We have a lot of street gangs in which young girls are recruiting other young girls and pushing them out there on the streets. So yes, all of that is still a major portion.
So just I want to go back to what we were talking about before, and you said, how can we stem this? And there's an old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And unfortunately in this business, you have to look at these poor victims, and there probably isn't a month that goes by that I have parents come to my office and show me the phones of their daughters or sons, but particularly daughters, that were sending nude pictures. And in looking at hundreds of thousands of these pictures, I came across the common theme. And a common question for parents that ask us is, what's the one thing I can do to not have my child be a victim? The pattern I saw was that every naked picture that a child took to send to somebody, which usually is the key indicator of the start of this engagement, was behind closed doors, right? It was in the bedroom or in the bathroom. And then in talking with the parents to say, well, tell me how this progressed. Their child, let's just say child, said, well, they started becoming a little bit more recluse. They started spending a little bit more time in their bedroom. They started locking the bedroom door. Then it was a downward spiral. So there's two elements that always exist there. We gave them a phone, totally unfettered, totally unlocked, totally unmonitored. And then we allowed them in their room with it. And then their room became this inner sanctuary where they went to do things that they wouldn't do in the kitchen or in the living room with their brothers and sisters.
Mrs. Tappan, I'm almost out of time. I've got about 30 seconds left for you. So for parents watching at home tonight, following up on what the special agent just said, what are the signs? Anything more to add that he's addressed? What are the signs they should look for to say, you know what, bing, there's a problem here?
First, I'm going to say October 14th, 8 a.m. is our Walk for Freedom. We are going to be asking you guys to come. It's a free walk, and it's at Bartram Park, where we're going to show signs, we're going to show symptoms, and we're going to talk about the statistics. So when you have a child that's out there right now, just whether it's phone, social media, or whatever, just ask them. Just start asking them, what apps are you on? Let me see what you've got going on over there. If a child is withdrawn and has been feeling rejected, it's time to step in and make some action.
And we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. We've had considerable discussion tonight. Hopefully you found some of the answers you were looking for on this particular topic. We're continuing discussion on our Facebook page at facebook.com/WEARTV. Join the discussion there. Make certain you watch 3 News for coverage of this roundtable and all the day's breaking news. On behalf of my colleague Sue Strawn, our panelists here, the fantastic crew of 3 News, I'd like to thank you at home for joining us. In closing, we'd like to salute our military, law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, and other emergency personnel for their service to our communities and our nation. I'm Mark Hyman. Good night.